Apex 2414.
Late in the evening of October 5th, 2006, a fire broke out at a hazardous waste transfer facility in Apex, North Carolina, a suburb of Raleigh. The facility was owned by the Environmental Quality Company, known as EQ. Apex Fire Chief Mark Haraway directed the emergency response.
That explosion went off, it shook the ground where we were standing. That was followed subsequently by a barrage of almost like artillery fire. 39 explosions. We quit counting at 39.
It was like a low frequency rumble, and then you'd hear a succession of them, like a boom, boom, boom. And that's what really got my attention.
As the fire spread, a thick haze drifted over the town.
The initial police squad that was on duty had a supervisor and 6 officers, and when I arrived at the scene, they were already doing the door-to-door evacuations. You had kind of this yellowish haze. I kind of liken it to a low-lying fog sort of appearance.
Philip Sloop lives near the accident site.
I distinctly smelled chlorine, and it was very hazy, all in this area where we're standing. It was very hazy and smelled like chlorine.
Apex Mayor Keith Weatherly recalls the night of the accident.
We knew that there was a widespread threat to that neighborhood and maybe to the whole town, depending on the wind, of course, and that's what precipitated our widespread evacuation notice.
City officials ordered thousands of residents to evacuate their homes.
When we first got on the scene, the chemical plume had already enveloped almost 7 blocks of a residential subdivision. We knew there were another 27 blocks to be affected. We were going to try to get that 27 blocks out of harm's way. We were operating strictly on a large event of an unknown chemical and erring on the side of safety by going with our worst case scenario plan, which was to take that evacuation point a mile out.
Kelly McLaughlin resides in Apex with her family.
As a parent, you make sure your kids are dressed warmly and that they put their seatbelts on, and you teach them to wear their bike helmets, and you do everything to keep them safe. And then something like this happens, and you realize that there are certain areas where you're a lot more powerless than you'd like to be, and so that was scary.
Much of the town of 34,000 was in the area of the evacuation. Some residents were put up in public shelters. Because of shifting winds, the entire incident command center, which involved large numbers of police, fire, and EMS personnel, had to be relocated 5 times. It was a logistical nightmare, according to Apex Fire Chief Haraway.
Our whole emergency database is gone. Then you lose your 911 center and the capability to dispatch units to talk and communicate. Then you lose your police station. Then you lose City Hall. You know, it starts adding up, and then you got to go make the report to the government leaders, your bosses, and say, hey, pretty much lost the entire town so far, you know, as far as what we're doing here. We're going to operate out of a tent.
The fire destroyed the EQ hazardous waste transfer facility, and it has not been rebuilt. The Chemical Safety Board investigated and issued a case study identifying several key safety issues.
Our investigation found that federal regulations do not require hazardous waste companies to provide important written information on the materials they handle to first responders. Such information is necessary for local officials to effectively plan for emergencies.
The EQ facility was ill-prepared for an emergency that might occur outside of normal working hours when no one was there. Here's what happened on the night of the accident.
The EQ hazardous waste building had a metal roof and walls and was open on 2 sides. Inside, workers combined small quantities of similar waste materials into larger containers. These containers were stacked in bays along an elevated dock for later shipment to treatment and disposal facilities. In one bay, the company placed returns from retail stores, such as pesticides and paints. Other bays contained flammable and corrosive chemicals and laboratory wastes. One bay was designated for oxidizers. Among these materials was a large box of chemical oxygen generators, which had been removed from aircraft emergency oxygen systems during routine maintenance. Drums of solid chlorine-based pool chemicals were stacked on top of the generators. At 9:38 p.m., A resident driving past the facility called 911 to report a haze with a strong chlorine smell.
Apex 911, location of your emergency.
There is a chlorine leak.
Okay.
You can see a haze through the air, and the chlorine smell is very, very strong right there at the intersection. You can actually see the haze and real strong smell.
Okay.
The Apex Fire Department responded and sent in reconnaissance teams to investigate.
They made the report it was on fire. Like I say, the time it would take me to reach to the microphone, seconds. They reported, no, it's through the roof.
The fire started in the oxidizer bay. As it spread, dozens of the aircraft chemical oxygen generators activated, releasing oxygen, accelerating the blaze. The fire spread quickly to the flammable liquid bay, burning through the roof and causing numerous 55-gallon drums of waste to burst, sending fireballs hundreds of feet into the air. As haze and smoke spread from the facility, officials called for residents to leave their homes.
Can you contact fire and ask we need to start an evacuation back in toward Briarcliff and all that area?
If you could evacuate those people to the parking lot of the community center.
As the fire progressed, Fire Chief Haraway met the plant manager, who was unable to provide him with a detailed list of the chemicals inside.
He said, but I can tell you generally what's in there. You've got large quantities of flammables, combustibles, oxidizers, pesticides, poisons. The only thing I think left out of the 9 classifications was miscellaneous.
Police and other responders were cautioned to avoid the smoke and haze.
10-4 Command is advising that you all do not need to be driving in the clouds.
By the next day, about 30 people, including 12 police officers and 1 firefighter, were taken for medical attention at local hospitals for respiratory distress and nausea.
It's something when you're standing out in the parking lot and you put your people in the back of an ambulance, you send them to the hospital, and you don't know whether they're coming back or not. That's what we had to do.
Firefighters determined the best course of action was to let the fire burn itself out. The evacuations ended after 2 days.
We are glad to be home.
In a matter of seconds, not minutes, it went from, hey, Chief, it's on fire, to, explosions going up in the sky.
The CSB found that the unspent aircraft emergency chemical oxygen generators most likely contributed to the growth of the fire. The remnants of many burned-out generators were found in the debris. A fiberboard box of unspent generators had arrived at EQ after they were taken out of airline service at an aircraft maintenance facility. When accidentally activated or exposed to fire, the devices produce substantial amounts of heat and oxygen, which can initiate and accelerate combustion. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted this test, demonstrating how oxygen generators can initiate and accelerate a fire. The test was part of the NTSB investigation of the 1996 value jet crash in Florida, which was caused when the devices discharged in the plane's cargo bay. In June 2007, the CSB issued urgent recommendations and a safety advisory, calling for waste oxygen generators to be safely discharged before shipping by any transport mode.
Beyond oxygen generators, there are many other types of hazardous materials that may initiate or accelerate fires at waste transfer facilities. This highlights the importance of fire protection measures.
At the EQ facility in Apex, the bays were separated by 6-inch high curbs, designed only to contain spills. The CSB determined that firewalls would likely have contained the initial fire in the oxidizer bay, preventing it from spreading to other bays where flammables were kept. The only fire control equipment at EQ consisted of portable fire extinguishers, which were of no use when the open bay facility was unattended. EPA regulates hazardous waste facilities under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Those rules require what is referred to as fire control equipment on site, but there is no EPA or industry guidance defining such equipment. This allows facilities to operate without automatic fire detection and suppression systems, alarms, and after-hours and weekend monitoring, as was the case with EQ.
So they didn't have sprinklers, they didn't have early warning smoke or heat detection or anything like that. They didn't even have off-site notification. History has shown that sometimes early warning, early notification does preempt and get responders there in a timely fashion so they can act accordingly before something gets out of hand.
An automatic fire suppression system might have extinguished the fire at an early stage. The CSB investigation identified 22 other fires and chemical releases from hazardous waste facilities over the past 5 years, including this major fire at another EQ facility in Romulus, Michigan. The CSB concluded that the occurrence of these waste fires indicate there is a serious problem that should be addressed by the National Fire Protection Association, the body that develops the national fire codes.
The National Fire Codes provide detailed fire protection standards for many types of industrial facilities, but there is no fire code specifically for hazardous waste facilities.
The CSB recommended that the Environmental Technology Council, a trade association, develop standardized guidance on handling and storing hazardous waste to reduce the likelihood of fires and releases. And we urged the Environmental Technology Council, which represents the hazardous waste industry, to petition the National Fire Protection Association to develop a specific code for hazardous waste facilities for fire prevention, detection, control, and suppression.
I knew they were over there, but with a name like Environmental Quality, I had no idea what their business was. I didn't know that they stored toxic chemicals or oxidizing agents there. But it would really be nice if we could be made aware of companies like Environmental Quality that are operating right on our doorstep.
It is vital that emergency response agencies be well informed about hazardous materials stored within their jurisdictions. The CSB found that in the case of EQ, apex authorities had not been provided with all the information they needed.
Citizens expect us as the local jurisdiction to have knowledge of what's in our town, and also to have some official oversight on the way the facility is being run, managed, and how those chemicals are being, frankly, used, because it does pose a potential threat.
The CSB found that the EQ facility in Apex had not provided written information on the specific types, quantities, and locations of hazardous materials to the fire department or the local emergency planning committee. And when the fire occurred, there were no company personnel immediately available to provide information to the fire department.
That's an untenable situation for us to be in, not knowing the threat posed by that fire and explosion.
Fire departments, police, hospitals, and others in the community can better plan for emergencies when they are provided detailed information in advance. Although the EPA does require hazardous waste facilities to provide authorities with information about the materials they store and handle, the regulations do not explicitly state what information must be shared.
To help assure that emergency responders and communities get the information they need for planning, the CSB made the following recommendation. The EPA should require that companies handling hazardous waste provide written information to state and local emergency response officials on the type, approximate quantities, and locations of hazardous materials within their facilities. This information should be updated periodically within the 10-year period of an EPA permit.
Having been a policeman for 30 plus years, I am 100% convinced that preventing incidents is much better than responding to them. So one of the things that you want to do is to have as much knowledge as you can about what's in your community and know what's there and have a good level of understanding.
My recommendation would be to go and look at your existing plan and identify, make sure your plan is up to date. Do a vulnerability assessment and a hazard assessment of your community. Make sure you don't have hazards that you're not even aware of.
You should not be too frugal in the providing resources for your public safety people. Training and equipment are utmost, and knowing you've got that available to you.
I guess I would just say to anyone who manufactures chemicals or stores or transports them that I'd really appreciate that they consider the magnitude of what they do and how not following safety precautions can really impact not only people but whole communities, and not just one generation but generations to come.
We believe adoption of the CSB recommendations would reduce the likelihood of major accidents at hazardous waste facilities. Thank you for watching this CSB safety video.
For more information on the CSB investigation of the EQ accident, please visit our website at csb.gov.
Or 14.
10-4, fire is requesting someone go to James and Shefflin. James and Shefflin. Apex 2414. Reference to possible chlorine spill.
38, which direction you coming from?
Time out 2138 hours.
On North Mason, heading towards center. 423, back to 1022 to area. Full copy. 38, just advised. It appears that cloud is moving to the west. Can you contact fire and ask when you start evacuation?